Today we're going to be talking about love and it's a hard topic to talk about. Not about love, but today we'll be talking from the prophet Hosea. And Hosea is an interesting book because it's not the normal, easy discussion of love that we're used to. Even when we talk about Jesus, we've come to understand that something happened to him. He gave his life because he loved us. But the book of Hosea is a little bit different in that discussion of love. To give some background, Hosea is one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. And in his prophecies, in the story of Hosea, God calls Hosea to fall in love with and to marry a woman of ill repute, a prostitute. And so the first thing is like, what? So he's called to marry this woman, and not only is he called to marry her, he's called to love her. And they're called to have children. And the 3 children shall have interesting names. The first son shall be called Jezreel. For Jezreel was the place that the king Ahab was killed and Jehu took over. So the name Jezreel would be for vengeance for the house of Ahab. His daughter shall be called Lo Ruham, which means not pitied. God will not have pity on those who conquered. And his final son shall be called Lo Ami, which means not my people. So just off the bat, it's a strange story. It's a strange allegorical story. And for those who don't know necessarily what allegory means, allegory is a story or a poem or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. But yet this story, this book of Hosea, is a lot of things, but slightly allegorical is not one of them. In fact, it's very heavy-handedly allegorical. Because God feels that God is like Hosea, and God has married a woman of ill repute, which is the people of Israel, who keep falling into old customs, who keep going back to what they used to do, who keep going and being unfaithful. So when we come to our chapter 3 today, God has already told Hosea to marry, and he did. Hosea had the 3 kids, and he named them. And his wife has gone back to her old life, out of custom, out of being used to, out of not knowing any better. We won't know, but we know that she returned. So that's where our chapter 3 picks up today. The Lord said to me again, "Go, love a woman who has a lover and is an adulteress, just as the Lord loves the people of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer of barley and a measure of wine. And I said to her, you must remain as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore. You shall not have intercourse with a man, nor I with you. For the Israelites shall remain many days without a prince or king, without sacrifice or pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward, the Israelites shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. They shall come in all of the Lord and to his goodness in the latter days." The word of the Lord. This story is an interesting story, but it is not like the Brady Bunch at all. It's not a story of a man named Brady who had 3 kids and married a woman with 3 kids. Instead, it is a man who is a prophet a man of God who marries a woman of ill repute and has children and is living out the life that God feels that God has lived out with the people of Israel. Some interesting facts. This is the first of the minor prophets, and it's written mostly to the northern kingdom of Israel. I'm sure many have heard, if you've watched History Channel or you've read National Geographics, they often talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That's because often everything we know about Israel comes from the southern two kingdoms, which is Judah, which was Jerusalem and the area around it. Those were the kingdoms that remained until 2,000 years ago, and that they're trying to reestablish today. The northern kingdom disappeared centuries before that. And it is to those people, to the northern kingdom of Israel, that Hosea is writing to. So I'm not sure if you should take this as encouragement or discouragement, because the 10 kingdoms disappeared forever. And God was trying to bring them in. So God tried and worked and did, and yet they continued to turn their back. Like a woman of ill repute who continues to turn her back. And so as I read this, I wondered, how do we reflect this today? How do I as an individual, how do we as Lower Merion Baptist Church, and how do we as the church? It doesn't seem so out of place to say that in many ways we are very much like the people of Israel, where we have our moments of loving God beyond everything, and we have moments of pushing God aside, and we have moments of just not believing anymore at all. We tend to put things before God. We tend to put things before what we should be doing. We should be seeking and we should be trying, but yet we often push God aside. And so too often, God becomes God's with a little g, instead of being God with the big G, with the capital G, our God. We tend to worship gods with a little g. And this comes like when we look at this history of Israel, God freed them from Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. They saw the sea open. They saw the plagues. They saw everything that happened. God brought them to the mountain where God lived. And what did they do? They created an image because Moses took too long on the mountain. From the beginning, they were willing to worship gods with a little g, when they had God, the Creator, with a capital G, God. They chose to worship little gods. They created an image of Baal, or Baal, which means husband. So they would rather this cow, this golden image, be their husband, rather than God, the Creator. But how does that look for us? What are some of the things and some of the people or some of the situations and circumstances that become little g gods in our life? Money, romance, work, even the church itself becomes a little g god for us. Because we come to church, why? We come to church to worship the Lord, or do we come to church because that's what we're supposed to do? Every Sunday you should be here because that's what you're supposed to do. Our traditions become our little g gods that we put before God the Creator. The love of money. The Bible never says that money is evil, but the love of money causes all sorts of evil. And why is that? Because our focus goes from God, the Creator, God with a capital G, the God, to gods with a little g. Who are you putting in front of yourself? Who are you bowing down to and worshiping? Who is becoming a little g God in your life? Who is causing you to ignore and forget the God of justice? Who is causing you to forget the creator of all things, the God who created by saying? God didn't even take something and form it with his hands. God said, and it was. That's a powerful God. Instead, we worship things that we create with ourselves, with our own hands. I'm going to work really hard and grow my savings, and I'm going to worship this. This is what I'm going to work towards, work for. This is what I'm going to focus on. And where does that lead us? Does it lead to our happiness? Does it lead to our fulfillment? Does it lead to the things that help us to be better people? Or does it cause us more harm and difficulty? Where is your God? Who is your God? Later on in Hosea 6, Hosea talks about cheap grace. Because often we may come to a service or we may come to a moment and realize, you know what? I need to focus on God and not on these little gods. I need to focus on who it is that created me and called me, and not on money and not on this person, not on this relationship, but on God. But it turns into cheap grace because, like the morning mist, as soon as the sun rises, it dissipates. At that moment, we may feel wholeheartedly that we're going to change, but as soon as the sun rises, it disappears and we go back to our normal customs. It goes back to whatever we were doing before. It goes back to the little g God whom we were worshiping. How do we change that? How am I like Gomer, the wife of ill repute? How are we, the church, like her, who though God has called us, we are the bride of Christ. We are the body of Christ. We are the manifestation of God in this world, the physical presence of God. That's who the church is. How are we being that in this world? How am I being that in my world, with the people I interact with, the people who cross my path, the people whom I come in contact with? How am I being the presence of God? Am I helping them to see God, or am I turning my back and becoming like my old self? The story of Gomer is one that she couldn't stay faithful because she didn't know how to do it. Is that our excuse? Is that our reason for not representing God in a way that is worthy? Of not being the presence of God with those who are around us? Is it too difficult? Is it too hard to be as God has called us to be? Is it easier to just go back and to be whoever it is that they want us to be? They being the people whom we're in contact with. So when I'm here, then I'm one way, and when I'm there, I'm another. Here I say things that are this way, and there I say things that are that way. Are we like the mist in the morning that dissipates when the sun rises? Where at night we may say, tomorrow is going to be the day that it changes. I am going to change. And as soon as the sun rises, we're back to our old selves. How are we different from the woman of ill repute? She did the things that she did, and she fell back into old customs because that's what she was used to. That's what she had grown accustomed to. She was used to being treated a certain way. She was used to being spoken to a certain way. She was used to all of the stuff that was given to her, good and bad. She was used to being treated like a woman of the street. And here this Hosea was trying to love her and to be with her as a husband and provide for her as a husband. It's easy to just say, she is just a terrible person. It's easy to point the finger and say, they got what they deserve. But if we walk in their shoes, if we were to put on her dress and walk in her shoes, what would we do? I dare say that we'd fall back into old habits as well. For too often, that's what we do. We fall into habits that we're used to. Whether they're helpful or not, that doesn't matter. It's what we're used to. When someone is abused, they'll say something like, well, he doesn't hit me all the time. It's only when I make him angry. And as a person on the outside, you might say, well, that's wrong. But it's easy to judge from a distance. It's easy to judge as an outsider. It's easy to make decisions for someone else because you have not walked in their shoes. Where do you come from? I'm a kid from the Bronx who grew up around crackheads. I used to live around women of ill repute, see them all the time. They were normal. They weren't people who were below. They weren't people who were bad people. They were people who were struggling just like me and my family. And to make ends meet, that's how they did it. Whether it was right or wrong, it's easy to judge now and say you're wrong because I'm better than you. I'm over here and you're over there. But let me see you put on those shoes. Let me see you live that life. Let me see you struggle in the struggles that they struggled. And you tell me how you would react. It's not so easy. You see, but that's how we have to come at it. We can't come as people of judgment and saying, you over there. Because every time, I was always taught that every time you point a finger, there's three pointing back at you, right? You over there, you're a bad person, you're doing this. Why don't you go over there and walk with them and see why it is that they're doing what they're doing and how you can help them to change? Words are easy, actions are difficult. In our story, Hosea goes back and gets her once again. Hosea takes her out. He pays for her again to take her out of that life. Just like God continuously throughout the Old Testament goes back and pays for Israel and brings Israel back. Just like Jesus, who came and died on the cross so that we here today can come back. Does it mean that we're going to be perfect now? No. But it means that we can know better. So now the decision is up to us. The decision is up to you. The decision is, how do you share this with others? How do you live this out in your life with others? Because for many of us, we've been in this forever, so we feel like we're okay. We're church people, you know. We've done this. But it's not about the here. It's about the out there. So here you may know what to say and how to say it. But when you're living your life outside, when you're living your life in the everyday, do they see God in you? Or are you like Gomer and you go back to your old ways? So you're sanctified on Sunday and very unsanctified the other 6 days. How are you living the other 6 days of your life, in your week? Are you representing God in your everyday? Or are you turning back to what you're used to and what you're comfortable with? Can others see God in you? Or do they just hear you say one thing and watch you live another? So as we come to the end of this sermon, I want you to think about your everyday. How do you represent God in your everyday? Or do you represent God? I want you to be honest. I want you to be honest with yourself. And if you realize that you don't represent God, then that's a breakthrough. It's okay. Okay, now I realize that I don't represent God. So what can I do to change that? Do you represent God in your everyday? If you don't, how can you change that? If you do, how is it affecting others? If you speak of God, are you living God? Because we all can talk about people who have spoken a good word, but their lives are the complete opposites. But we can also talk about people who never said a word, but their life spoke more than all the words they could have used. So how are you representing God in your everyday? Are you representing God?